Mahmoud, hungry, 2015, 17 days from home. They came for Mahmoud and his father again the next morning, this time to take them to a crowded refugee camp in a cold, muddy field surrounded by a wire fence. Multicolored camping tents stood among heaps of trash and discarded clothes, and Hungarian soldiers in blue uniforms and white surgical masks guarded the entrances and exits. There was only one real building, a windowless cinder block warehouse filled with row after row of metal cots. Mahmoud and his father found Mom and Walid among the newly arrived refugees, and they shared a tearful reunion. They were each given a blanket and a bottle of water and found cots for themselves. But when the food was delivered, they missed out. The Hungarian soldiers stood at one end of the room, tossing sandwiches into the crowd like zookeepers throwing food to the animals in a cage. And Mahmoud and his family didn't know enough to rush the tables to catch their lunch. Mahmoud expected his father to laugh it off, but he wasn't joking anymore. Instead, Dad sat on his cot, his face and arms purple and bruised and staring off into space. Getting beaten and thrown into prison by the Hungarians had finally broken his spirit. It scared Mahmoud. Of the 4 members of his family who were left, he was the only one who wasn't broken. His mother had snapped the moment she had handed her daughter away, and now she wandered the maze of mattresses and blankets in the detention center, asking people she had already asked if they had seen or heard of a baby named Hannah. Mahmoud's brother, Walid, was broken too, but unlike his mother, he had broken piece by piece over time, like someone snapping off little bites of a chocolate bar until there was nothing left. He lay listless on a foam mattress, disinterested in the card games or soccer games the other children were playing. Whatever childish joy he had once possessed had been sucked out until there was nothing left at all. And now his father was dead inside too. Mahmoud fumed. Why were they even here? Why did the Hungarians care if they were just passing through? Why had they taken them all the way to Austrian border, only to throw them into a detention center? It felt personal somehow, like the whole country was conspiring to keep them from finding a real home. There were policemen with guns at every door. They were more like prisoners than refugees, and when they got out of here, it would just be to go back to Serbia, back to another country that didn't want them. After everything they had been through, they weren't going to make it to Germany after all. But Mahmoud wasn't ready to give up. He wanted life to be like it was before the war had come. They couldn't go back to Syria, not now. Mahmoud knew that, but there was no reason they couldn't make a new life for themselves somewhere else. Start over, be happy again. And Mahmoud wanted to do whatever it took to make that happen, or at least try. But making something happen meant drawing attention, being visible. And being invisible was so much easier. It was useful too, like in Aleppo or Serbia and here in Hungary. But sometimes it was just as useful to be visible, like in Turkey and Greece. The reverse was true too, though. Being invisible had hurt them as much as being visible had. Mahmoud frowned, and that was the real truth of it, wasn't it? Whether you were visible or invisible, it was all about how other people reacted to you. Good and bad things happened either way. If you were invisible, the bad people couldn't hurt you. That was true. But the good people couldn't help you either. If you stayed invisible here, did everything you were supposed to, and never made waves, you would disappear from the eyes and minds of all good people out there who could help you get back to life. It was better to be visible, to stand up, to stand out. Mahmoud watched as a door on a nearby wall opened and a group of men and women in light blue caps and vests with the letters UN written on them came inside, escorted by some important-looking Hungarian soldiers. Mahmoud knew that the UN was the United Nations, the same group that had been helping at the Kilis refugee camp. The UN people carried clipboards and cell phones and made notes and took pictures of the living conditions. This place was run by the Hungarians, not the UN, so Mahmoud guessed they were here to observe, to document the living conditions of the refugees. Mahmoud decided right then and there he was going to make sure the observer saw him. Mahmoud got up from his cot and walked to the door. All he had to do was push his way through and he would be outside, but a Hungarian soldier stood next to it. She wore a blue uniform, a red cap, and a thick black leather belt that held a nightstick and had all kinds of compartments. Over her shoulder she carried a small automatic rifle on a strap, the barrel pointed at the gymnasium floor. The guard ignored Mahmoud. He stood right in front of her, but she looked over him, past him. Mahmoud was invisible as long as he did what he was supposed to do. And as long as he was invisible, he was safe. And she was comfortable. It was time for both of those things to change. Mahmoud took a deep breath, pushed the door open. The sound echoed loudly in the big room, and suddenly all the kids stopped playing and all the adults looked up from their mattresses at him. It was green outside and sunny, and at first Mahmoud had to squint to see. "Hey!" the guard cried. She saw him now, didn't she? The UN observers did too. "Stop! No, not allowed," the soldier said in bad Arabic. She struggled to find the right words and said something in Hungarian that Mahmoud didn't understand. She started to raise her gun at him, and then she glanced up and saw the frowns on the faces of the UN observers. Mahmoud stepped outside. The woman looked around at the other guards and called out to them, as if asking what to do. Mahmoud took another step and another, and soon he was away from the building, walking toward the road. Walid ran through the door after him, followed by the rest of the children. The Hungarian guards yelled after them, but they didn't do anything to stop them. "Mahmoud," Walid said, panting as he ran up alongside his brother. His eyes were bright and alive. For the very first time Mahmoud could remember. "Mahmoud, what are you doing?" "I'm not staying in that place and waiting for them to send me back to Serbia. Come on," Mahmoud said. "We're walking to Austria." Wow, that takes a lot of courage. I'm really impressed. And all of a sudden Walid just snapped out of it and came alive, and maybe it's because his brother had that courage to just stand up for what he believed in. That is amazing. Joseph, Vournier, France, 1940. 1 year, 1 month, and 10 days from home. Gunfire crackled. An artillery shell whistled overhead and hit with a shuddering boom somewhere nearby. Ruthie cried, and Joseph's mother hugged her close. Joseph peeked out the window. They were hiding in a tiny schoolhouse in a village called Vournier, and somewhere south of Bourges in France. The desks were all in perfect rows, and a long-forgotten assignment was still written on the chalkboard. It was dark outside, and the trees surrounded the schoolhouse made it even darker. That was good. It helped them hide, but it also made spotting German stormtroopers harder. Joseph ducked back down inside, and his eyes fell on the map of Europe on the wall. The various countries shaded different colors. How wrong that map was now, just a year after he and his family had come to France as refugees. Germany had absorbed Austria and conquered Poland and Czechoslovakia soon after. Holland and Belgium and Denmark had fallen to Hitler, and the Nazis occupied the northern half of France, including Paris. All of France had surrendered, but there were still pockets of Free France forces resisting the Nazis throughout the countryside where Joseph and his family were now. The only refugees from the St. Louis who were still safe, Joseph realized, were the ones who had made it to Great Britain. The word was that Hitler was going to try to cross the English Channel any day now. Joseph and his mother and sister were trying to get to Switzerland in the hope that the Swiss would give them refuge. They'd made it this far traveling by night, sleeping in hay barns and out in fields under the stars, but the Nazis had finally caught up with them. A light played across the window above him, and Joseph chanced to look out again. Stormtroopers headed toward the school. "They're coming," Joseph told his mother. "We have to go." His mother picked up Ruthie and headed for the door, but Joseph stopped her. There was only one door to the schoolhouse, and the Nazis would be using it. "No, this way," he said. Joseph kept low as he scurried to the back wall of the classroom. There was a window there. They could climb out and run for the woods. He tried the handle. It was stuck. Joseph looked over his shoulder. He could see the beam of flashlight in the hall outside, could hear the familiar German language of his homeland. They had to get out of there. Joseph threw his elbow against the glass, and it shattered. That brought a cry from the hallway. Joseph knocked the rest of the glass out of the window in panic. He felt his coat sleeve rip, felt something cold and sharp against his skin, but he didn't have time to think about it. He helped his mother out first, then handed Ruthie out to her through the window. "Go! Go!" Joseph said before he was even all the way out the window, and his mother picked up Ruthie and ran for the darkness of the woods. None of them carried suitcases anymore. Those had been left behind long ago, but they all still wore their coats, even though it was the height of summer. His mother had insisted. The only thing any of them still carried was Bitsy, the little stuffed bunny Ruthie had never parted with. It was tucked tightly under Ruthie's arm. Joseph leaped down from the window, stumbled, got back up, and ran. There! There! The beam of flashlight found him. A pistol cracked, and a bullet blew the bark off a tree less than a meter away from him. Joseph stumbled again in panic, righted himself, and kept running. Behind him, the stormtroopers were yelling to each other, barking like dogs after a fox. They were on the scent now and wouldn't let up, not until Joseph and his family had been caught. There's a house up ahead, his mother yelled over her shoulder. She swerved into a small dirt lane, and Joseph overtook her, beating her to the door. It was a little French country house with 2 windows on either side, and a double door in the middle and a chimney on one side. Joseph caught a faint whiff of smoke from the kitchen fire, and the curtain fluttered in the window. Someone was inside. Joseph pounded on the door. He glanced over his shoulder. 3 flashlight beams were bouncing up the lane toward them. Help! Please help us! Joseph whispered frantically, still pounding. No one answered. No lights came on inside. Halt! Came a young man's voice. Joseph spun around. There were 4 German soldiers behind them. 3 of them pointed flashlights at them, making Joseph squint. He could still see well enough to know that 2 of them had rifles pointed at them. A third carried a pistol. Hands up, put the child down, the stormtrooper told Joseph's mother. Ruthie tried to cling to her, but Mama did as she was told. Dully, Joseph realized that he had just lost the feeling in his right arm and that his sleeve was coated in blood. He'd cut himself on the window glass badly. He squeezed the place where his arm had grazed the glass, and the pain was blinding that it almost made him pass out. Ruthie had her head down, crying, but she raised her little bunny's right arm and said, Heil Hitler. One of the soldiers laughed, and as he blinked the pain of his arm away, Joseph thought maybe the soldiers would let them go, but one of them said, Papers. They were in trouble now for sure. Their papers had the big letter J's stamped all over them. J for Jew. We don't have papers, Mama said. One of the soldiers gestured at her, and a stormtrooper with a rifle marched up to them and checked her coat pockets. He quickly found the papers she carried for her and Ruthie, and just as easily found Joseph's papers on him. The soldier brought them back to a man with a flashlight, and he unfolded them. Jews, the man said. From Berlin? You've run a long way from home. You have no idea, Joseph thought. We're going to Switzerland, Ruthie said. Hush, Ruthie, Joseph hissed. Switzerland? Is that so? Well, I'm afraid we cannot allow that, the soldier said. You will be taken to a concentration camp like the rest of the Jews. Why, thought Joseph. Why bother hunting us down and taking us back to prison? If the Nazis want us Jews gone so badly, why don't they just let us keep going? One of the soldiers came toward them with a gun. No, wait, Joseph's mother cried. I have money. Reichsmarks. French francs. She fumbled inside her shirt where she kept her money hidden. The bills fluttered to the ground. The soldier moved the bills around with his feet and made a tisk sound. It's not enough, I'm afraid. Joseph's heart sank. At the chance she might really be able to buy their way out, Joseph's mother became hysterical. Wait, I have jewelry, diamonds. She yanked at Ruthie's coat, pulling it off her head. Mama, what are you doing? Ruthie cried. Joseph's mother ripped at the seams the way his father had when he'd rent his garments to old Professor Weiler on the ship. From Ruthie's coat, she pulled something that glittered in the light of the electric torches. Earrings. The diamond earrings Joseph's father had bought her for their anniversary one year. Joseph remembered Papa giving them to her, remembered the smile on Mama's face, the light in her eyes, both long gone now. Mama had sewn her earrings into the lining of Ruthie's coat. That was why she had never let Ruthie take it off. The soldier took the earrings from Joseph's mother and examined them in the light. Joseph held his breath. Maybe they would let his mother buy their way out after all. Everything I was able to keep, his mother said. It's all yours. Just let us go. These are very nice, the soldier said, but I think there is only enough here to buy freedom for one of your children. But that's all I have left, Mama said. The soldier looked at her expectantly. At first, Joseph didn't understand what he wanted. They didn't have anything else to give him. But then the Nazi pulled Joseph and Ruthie to him and turned them around for Mama to see. And that's when Joseph understood. The Nazi didn't care how much money they had, how many jewels. It wasn't about that. He was playing with them. This was another game. like a cat plays with a mouse before he ate it. I think there's only enough here to buy freedom for one of your children. One of Rachel Landau's children would go free, and one of the children would go to the camps. The Nazi soldier smiled at Joseph's mother. You choose. Okay, as a mom, I can't even begin to imagine what Rachel Landau is feeling right now. She's sending one of her children to freedom, and she's sending one of her children to death, basically, to the concentration camp. And she has no control over it. Isabel, Miami Beach, Florida, 1994, 5 days from home. Here in this boat that had been her home for 4 days and 4 nights, Isabel's little brother was born. Not right away. First had come her mother's frantic pushing to bring the baby into the world, while the rest of them paddled. All but Senora Castillo, who sat on the bench next to Mommy, holding her hand and talking her through it. Behind them, the Coast Guard had finished picking up Isabel's grandfather and was headed to their way, lights flashing. Their little blue boat was close to the shore. The waves around them were breaking with white caps. Isabel could see people dancing on the beach, but they weren't close enough, weren't going to make it. That's when Mommy's cries had mixed with Amara's yell to swim for it, and Luis and Amara hopped over the side, half swimming, half tumbling toward shore. No, wait, Isabel cried. Her mother couldn't swim for the beach. Not like this. They had to paddle her in, or Mother would never make it to the U.S. Isabel and Papi and Senor Castillo rowed as hard as they could, but the Coast Guard ship was faster. It was going to catch them. Go, Isabel's mother told her husband between pants. If you're caught, they'll send you back. No, Papi said. Go, Mommy said again. If I'm caught, they'll just send me back to Cuba. Go and take Isabel. You can send money like you always planned. No, Isabel cried, and amazingly her father agreed. Never, he insisted. I need you, Teresa. You and Isabel and little Mariano. Isabel's mother sobbed at the name, and the tears sprang to Isabel's eyes too. Like the boat, they had never settled on a name for the baby. Not until now. Naming the baby after Lito was the perfect way to remember him, no matter where they were. But they'll send us back, Mommy sobbed. Then we'll go back, Papi said, together. He put his forehead to his wife's temple and held her hand, taking Senora Castillo's place as Mommy made her last push. The Coast Guard ship bounced in its waves. It was almost on top of them. It's time, Senor Castillo said. We have to swim for it, now. No, please, Isabel begged, paddling helplessly against the tide, tears running down her face. They were so close, but Senor Castillo was already helping his wife over the side into the water. They were abandoning the ship. Isabel's mother cried out louder than before, but Papi was with her. He would take care of her. All that mattered now was rowing as hard as Isabel could. She was her mother's last hope. Take Isabel with you, she heard her mother say between pushes. But Isabel wasn't worried. She knew her father would not listen, that he would never leave. Neither of them would. They were family. They would be together forever. But then, suddenly, arms were picking her up, lifting her over the side. Say goodbye to Fidel, Senor Castillo said. He was the one Mommy had been talking to. He had come back, and he was the one lifting Isabel out of the boat and into the water. No, no, Isabel cried. You saved my life once. Now let me save yours, Senor Castillo told her. Isabel didn't listen. She kicked and screamed, trying to get free. She didn't want to go to the States if it meant leaving her parents, her family behind. But Senor Castillo was too strong. He tossed her in the water, and she sank under the waves in a tangle of arms and legs and bubbles before quickly hitting bottom. Isabel found her footing and pushed herself back up out of the water. It was chest deep, and the waves that slid by her toward shore lifted her up and set her down again on the sand. Ivan's cap had come off her head in her splashdown, and she snatched it up before it disappeared in the surf. Then she grabbed the side of the boat to climb back in. Senor Castillo's arm went around her waist and pulled her away. No, Isabel cried. I won't leave them. Hush, we're not going anywhere, Senor Castillo said. Help us pull the boat to shore. Isabel looked around, and for the first time, he saw that Senor Castillo was still there, and Luis and Amara were there too. They all stood waist deep in the water around the boat. They had come back. They all found somewhere to grab on the boat and pull, churning up the sand at their feet. Isabel sobbed with relief and grabbed hold. It was harder for her to pull when the waves kept lifting her, but the sight of the Coast Guard boat bearing down on them helped motivate her. So did the cheering. The other refugees on the Coast Guard ship were hopping up and down and clapping and yelling encouragement, just like the crowd on the beach had been when they left Havana. Isabel saw her grandfather running up and down the ship, waving them toward shore, like a baseball player urging a home run ball around the foul pole. She laughed in spite of herself. The water was just below Isabel's waist. They were almost there. The Coast Guard ship cut its engines to run up to them, and that's when Isabel heard her baby brother cry for the very first time. The sound stunned Isabel and the others into stillness. It took her father a moment to cut the umbilical cord with his pocket knife. Then he stood up in the boat with something tiny and brown, staring down at it like he had held the world's most incredible treasure in his arms. Isabel gaped. All this time, she had known her mother was having a baby. Isabel had seen plenty of babies before. They were cute, but nothing special. But this wasn't just any baby. This was her brother. She had never met him before this moment, and she loved him now with the deepness she had never felt before, not even toward Ivan. This was Mariano, her little brother, and she suddenly wanted to do anything and everything she could to protect him. Papi finally looked up from the newborn son. "Help me get Teresa out of the boat," he told the others. The Coast Guard ship was almost alongside the boat, and the adults scrambled for the other side. Papi bent down over the bow and held out her crying baby brother to Isabel. As if in a dream, Isabel's arms reached up and took him. He was covered with something slimy and gross, and he was screaming like somebody had slapped him, but he was the most amazing thing Isabel had ever seen. Little Mariano. Isabel hugged him protectively against the push and pull of the waves. He was so tiny, so light. What if she stumbled? What if she dropped him? How could her father have put something so new, so precious in her arms? But then she understood. Isabel had to carry little Mariano to shore so her father and the others could carry Mommy behind them. "Go, Isabel," her father told her, and she went. Isabel held that baby up high to keep him out of the waves that pushed them both to shore, stumbling as the water crashed against the back of her legs. But step by step, she staggered up onto the beach, onto United States soil. Isabel turned in the sand, soaking wet and exhausted, to look behind her. Papi and Amara and the Castillos were on their feet, carrying Isabel's mother through the shallow water, where the Coast Guard boat couldn't go. The ship had cut its lights and was backing out to sea. On the rear of the boat, among the waving, cheering refugees, was Isabel's grandfather. Isabel held the screaming baby up high for him to see, and Lito fell to his knees, hands clasped to his chest. Then the engines roared and the sea churned, and the Coast Guard ship disappeared out to sea. The Castillo and the Fernandez families helped each other up onto the sandy beach, and their wet feet became dry feet. Senor Castillo fell to his knees and kissed the ground. They had made it to the States, to freedom. Still in a dream, Isabel wobbled up the sand toward the flashing lights and thumping music and dancing people. She stepped into the light, and the music stopped, and everyone turned to stare. Then suddenly, people were running to help her and her family. A tan young woman in a bikini dropped into the sand beside Isabel. "Oh my God, Chiquita," she said in Spanish. "Did you just come off a boat? Are you Cuban?" "Yes," Isabel said. She was trembling, but she clung to Mariano like she would never let him go. "I am from Cuba," Isabel said, "but my little brother was born here. He is an American, and soon I will be too." So they made it safely. I am so excited. That's great. So now we have to figure out how Mahmoud is going to get to safety. He's on his way to walking to Austria, and we're hoping that he can make it. And Joseph still needs to get away from the German soldiers. So next time we'll pick up with Mahmoud. It's a great day to be a grizzly, and you guys keep working hard. Bye.